Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Wa arsala alayhim tayran ababil. Tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil. Faj'alahum ka'asfin ma'kul. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome again for another episode of Sira to Khatam Nabiyyin. If you recall, I left you on the last episode on the momentous occasion of where Abraha was going to attack with his elephant as the lead. He was going to attack Mecca, but particularly it wasn't aimed at in order to destroy the people of the city. His aim was one, and that aim was clear, and it was a key aim, which was to destroy the Kaaba. And the reason why he wanted to destroy the Kaaba, if you recall, was that the Abyssinians had moved out from Abyssinia towards Yemen in order to capture it, and he was now in charge of Yemen, and he wanted to push the faith that he had adopted, with mixed in with some idol worship, in order to remove and force, in a way, the Arabs to accept this new religion. But he'd realized that the Arabs had taken and the Kaaba, the house of Allah in Mecca, as their main source of or their main aim for pilgrimage. And as it was the main aim for pilgrimage, he felt that the only way that his church, which he had built, the church which is called Al-Qulais, that this church that would be taken, respected and valued, and the only way to remove the faith and the belief within the hearts of the Arabs was for them to respect and honor this particular church. So he set off in order to make this plan of his come into action. And we'd already mentioned how the Koresh, through their leader Abdul Muttalib, had gone to speak to him and discuss with him the situation, and he'd asked for his camels in return, to which Abraha was somewhat amused and bemused at the same time at the fact that he hadn't asked for protection of the Kaaba. So he inquired as to why he'd come for such a petty situation and for such a petty request, whereas not requesting the protection of the Kaaba, saying that this is a house which you hold in your hearts very highly, you respect, you value it, your forefathers value it, this is something which you connect through history, and yet you don't seem to be concerned about it. You haven't even begged for me, or you've not even asked me to not go ahead and attack, whereas you're asking me for 200 camels or so. And Abdul Muttalib answered in a remarkable and statesman-like way, in which he said, well, look, these camels belong to me. I've come here to ask for these camels, but the property, the house, the Kaaba has its own master, and he himself will protect it if he so desires. And before they left, before they took up defensive posture, before they took up a defensive measure and defensive positions within the mountains around Mecca, he went to beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the Kaaba, at the door of the Kaaba, holding onto the door knocker, and requested Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance, if he willed. So when he left, we see the next morning Abraha decided that this is the time where he will enter into Mecca, and he was riding his elephant. His troops were ready. His elephant's name, by the way, was Mahmud, and he decided that this is the direction that I will go in. So he'd already got a guide. Obviously, if you remember, in Taif, those individuals had said, look, leave our sort of temple alone. This is not the temple which had been dedicated to the idol, the goddess Allat. That this is ours, and this is not the one that you've come here to destroy. The one that you are after is the one in Mecca, and in order for us to be protected and safeguarded, we will show you the way into the city and how you can find this particular place. So they were directed towards Mecca, and when he came close by, Nufail ibn Habib came to it, and he took his ear, the ear of the elephant, and he whispered in the ear of the elephant, and he said to the elephant, kneel down and then go back to where you came from. You are now in Allah's holy land. And then he let the elephant go. And as he did so, the elephant started to kneel down. Now, elephants themselves aren't known for kneeling in that way. We see the way camels kneel down in order to A, rest, and B, let its rider mount or dismount. But elephants don't have that methodology. What you have to do is, like the way a person climbs onto a horse, is a person would have to climb onto the elephant. But the elephant surprisingly kneeled down and would not move. And Nufail ibn Habib then rushed off and hid in the mountains, because he knew that obviously what I've done now is going to bring about the anger and wrath of Abraha, and I would be killed. So Abraha himself tugged upon the reins of the elephant. His troops prodded, pushed, poked, pulled, and tried everything to get this elephant to stand. They even went as far as actually hurting it by striking it with axes and pushing javelins and other items into the animal's hide until it bled. But it would not move. It refused to stand. So what they did was, when they moved the animal back towards Yemen, the elephant got up. And when it got up, it rushed off and it started to move very quickly. Similarly, when they moved it in the direction of Sham towards the Holy Land, Beit al-Maqdis, it also rushed. But as soon as they turned it back towards Mecca again, it would kneel down and it would not move an inch. It would stay where it was. So this had already brought the whole army to a standstill, and they would not be able to move from that point. And as much as they're trying, but as they were, this is exactly where I recited to you the full surah at the beginning, which is Suratul Fil, which you'll find in the last para of the Quran, near the end. And it mentions in there what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did. And if we translate it, it says, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Do you not know, do you not see? Now obviously Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not around at that particular time to witness this. So what this is referring to is to this kind of knowledge existed amongst the people, and this was a huge situation, a huge event taking place in their history, that somebody for the first time had come to destroy the Kaaba. So this was told from mother to child, from father to son, and this had been passed on through the oral tradition, that there was a day when this great beast came from Yemen, and riding on this great beast was this Abyssinian, and he had come to destroy the Kaaba and lay to waste this holy house. And this was passed on. So this has been recorded. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka, he means, have you got the news? Have you got the information? And also, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then this knowledge is even of a higher status than knowledge of the eyes and the ears and the senses. Because the senses can be deceived. The eyes can be deceived in terms of seeing an illusion that's not there. The ears can be deceived. For example, when we hear an echo, we think that's actually a real sound, when it's not. It's the original sound just vibrating back to us. So senses can be deceived. But wahi, revelation, is qat'i. It is beyond being able to a person to deceive. So when Allah says, Alam tara kayfa, then this knowledge Allah is revealing to Prophet Muhammad himself. What your Rabb did, Rabbuka bi ashabil fil, by those individuals, those that were based with the elephant that came. Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not lay to waste? Did he not completely put in disarray the plot and the plan and the scheme that this individual Abraha had put together? Wa arsala alayhim tayran ababil. And we'll discuss this in more detail in a short while. And he sent against them birds, but not just birds alone, ababil, in flocks, a large number of birds, because birds, especially birds that migrate, travel in large numbers. And this is more for protection, because birds like swallows or swans or things of that nature can potentially be attacked by birds of prey like falcons and eagles, and they can be picked off if they're won. But when you see a flock of birds flying, it looks like a huge creature, because they move together in tandem. So when they go towards the east, they all move towards the east, and when they're moving down and up, and it's quite an astonishing sight to see the way these birds move around as if they're one creature. And it's amazing how they communicate with one another to know exactly when to turn left. You don't see another bird sort of suddenly turning right and smacking into the other bird which is turning left. They are all moving like one body. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent against them, ababil. تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ. And what did they do? Did these birds attack them? Did the birds peck out their eyes? Did the birds scratch them? No, they did something, because that would be something which a person could easily understand, and it would lose its miraculous nature. For this was a miracle which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself was protecting his house. But these birds didn't scratch at their eyes or use their beaks or anything of that nature. What these birds did is they carried in their claws and in their beaks stones. They carry stones, baked clay. Now these stones themselves, if they're dropped, now birds don't fly too high, but if a bird was to drop something on somebody, then it wouldn't necessarily cause them any damage. I'm sure you've been as unfortunate as I have when you're walking along and then suddenly you hear this sound, and when you look on your coat you see a white blotch of a pigeon flying by deciding to unleash its waste on you. But it doesn't sort of, go through your shoulder and damage you or give you dislocate your shoulder in any way. So these stones were miraculous in the speed that they picked up. فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَأَسْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ, and he made them as what? As consumed, as digested, as eaten chaff, the bit which is left standing. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dealt with them. There's much discussion as to what these birds were, which particular ones, but the ones which seems to be the most agreed upon view is there were swifts or crows that came, and each one of them, as I mentioned to you, was carrying 3 stones, one in its beak and one in each claw, which was bringing down. And the stones were small. They were the sort of size of stones that a person does when they're casting the jamarat, when they go for Hajj. They were that size, sort of roughly the size of a chickpea. And every soldier that this stone hit killed them. So the speed that they traveled at, and some narrators mention that the speed was due to the wind, that there was a wind blowing as well. And as soon as the birds dropped their stones, then the wind would pick up the speed of the stone until when it struck the individual, it struck him like a bullet. Because at the end of the day, a bullet is only so big, it's a piece of metal. But what it is the gunpowder, or is what's within it, the gun which propels it, and it's the speed which the bullet travels at, which penetrates the skin and obviously goes even further until it hits an organ or something and kills a person. Otherwise, it's just a piece of metal. It's the propulsion of the metal, and that's just missile technology, full stop. So it's quite amazing that you're finding within the Quran the discussion of missile technology or propulsion from a miraculous basis, where something which is something so small which can pick up speed depending on force or energy behind it. Now in this case, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, using being Allah, could make a stone pick up speed and travel at whatever he chooses, because he is Allah. Nowadays, obviously, what we have to do is we have to use our intellect, our knowledge, and make things and which generate a large amount of energy in order to force something to move forward. So imagine that they were basically bullets. These were the first bullets that we saw, were these birds carrying these 3 stones which acted like bullets and hit every soldier. But it didn't kill everybody, or all of them didn't die, because all of them weren't destined to die. Some of them weren't struck, and as a result they survived. So what they did was they obviously retreated in haste from the road which they had just come from, calling out to Nufail ibn Habib to say, lead us back to Yemen, because they were new to this area and they didn't really know which direction they would need to go in. So he would help them get out of that way. So what they did was they scrambled. Obviously, there's Ibn Ishaq mentions that they scrambled, they ran, they sort of died randomly. They were completely disorientated, completely disorganized. This is not what they expected. This was supposed to be a walkover. This was not supposed to be complicated. It was simply a case of marching forward and destroying a house. What could be more simpler than that? They dealt with more complicated things. They dealt with big armies. They dealt with big cities. This was supposed to be straightforward. There was nobody defending the Kaaba. They did not expect an army. They definitely did not expect an army of birds. And then to be sort of shot basically by stones, this is nothing that was sort of entering into their mind. Abraha was struck as well, and he was struck in his body with these bullets, if I can use that word. And what they did was they carried him. But what was, in his case, the stones seemed to be infected in some way, because he was sort of full of disease then after he was hit. And as they were carrying him away, parts of his body started to drop. So his fingers started to drop, his toes started to drop, and his body started to become bloated and let out blood and pus. So when he actually reached to Sana'a, which is in Yemen, he finally died when his heart just basically burst out of his chest. So some say that this was he contracted measles, or some say he contracted smallpox, and that was the first time an infectious disease came about within the Arab lands. So here we can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected his house. as Abdul Muttalib had suggested he would. And he used this, and this was a bounty and favor upon the Koresh, in that he used this method to support them. So I've already mentioned to you some other commentators mentioning that the stones were clay, that they mentioned that they became this sort of chewed mass afterwards, and how these, some have mentioned the various different types of birds potentially they were, but I gave you the most agreed upon view. So the Koresh felt quite honored at this and felt quite respected at this, because they thought, hold on, we must be upon some kind of haqq, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defended us in a way. He's defended our way of life, he's defended our house, he's defended us. And these individuals who were following the teachings of Isa alayhi salatu have been defeated. However, this is a misunderstanding, and this was a confusion within the minds of the Quraysh. This was not because in those times, the Abraha and his people, following at least in some way the teachings of Isa alayhi salatu, because some of those teachings had been perverted by now, that they were still following the teachings of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam to some extent, that they were closer towards haqq than the idol worshipping pagans were in of the Koresh. So what was going on here? Was this a victory for idolatry over monotheism? Is this the way it played out? That's not the case whatsoever. We have to remember here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defended his house. He did not defend the Quraysh. The Quraysh themselves had departed and they'd left Makkah behind, and they'd taken refuge in the mountains around Makkah. So this was not a victory to the idol worshippers over the Koresh. This was this was not a victory for the idol worshippers over the Christian Abyssinians. This was the defense of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that was what it was about. So that needs to be said in order to avoid any confusion as to what happened here. Is there something going on? But no, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protecting his house. So there is then some mention of Abraha. Abraha finally succumbs to his illness, as we saw. He dies eventually, and it's over. His son then takes power. His son Yaksum takes power, and then after Yaksum, when Yaksum dies, his brother Masruq ibn Abraha takes over, and he was the last of the kings, and it was from him then that Saif ibn Dhu Yazan of Himyar took the kingship. So eventually the power was taken away, as if you remember the two soothsayers had prophesied that eventually the power would be taken away from the Abyssinians, roughly 70 years, that they would survive for 70 years and have authority over Yemen until that would be taken back. And Saif ibn Dhu Yazan of Himyar, he took the kingship through his troops that he had brought from Khosrow, and we'll discuss that. Khosrow was Persia, and this was in the month of Muharram in the year 886, that was measured from the year of Dhul Qarnayn. So when Abraha and his two sons had died, the Abyssinian rule over Yemen had ended, as I mentioned already. The actual place, the church that Abraha had built, Al-Qulais, which obviously was built in his stupidity, where he actually thought that he would be able to divert the Arab association with the Kaaba, that he would be able to draw their attention towards this new place of worship, that he would be able to draw them towards making pilgrimage to this new place of worship. That didn't work as he originally planned. His plans were over. He himself had died. His two sons who followed, one had died and the other one had been taken over. Remember, power had been wrestled from him. Remember, I mentioned that even though they followed to a certain extent the teachings of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, idolatry had also creeped into their way of worship. As we see now, even though Isa alayhi salatu wasalam's teachings at the beginning were absolutely against idol worship in the sense of having statues or crosses or things of that nature, you notice now within the Christian faith, if you were to walk into a church, you'll see images of Maryam, or as Mary as she's referred to, and you'll see images of Jesus as perceived from the Christian faith, and you will see crosses, and people will carry crosses around with them, and it's now become very much imagery, where even went through the teachings of Isa alayhi salatu, there was no imagery, statues and using items was completely against his teachings. So, but in his case, in Abraha's case, he'd gone even further, and he'd used an idol, Qoeb, and his wife as idols within the church that he'd built. And then we know, obviously, it was eventually destroyed. So when his brother took over, Masruq ibn Abraha, remember this is the brother of Yaksum. Yaksum was the eldest son of Abraha. Then when the people of Yemen had enough, we mentioned Saif ibn Dhu Yazan. He was from the Himyar tribe, the Himyarite. He became rebellious and he fought back. And what he did was he went first before he fought back. He needed some support. So again, he also went first to the Byzantine Emperor. This is the, if you recall, this is the Eastern Roman Empire. And he sought help. He complained about the affairs in Yemen. And he said, look, they're abusers. We are captives in our own land. We would like your support so we can send the Abyssinians back to Abyssinia and so that we can take over. But when we take over, it will just be a state belonging to you. I can be appointed as a governor there, but it will be part of your kingdom and you will be able to extend your kingdom. But the emperor wasn't interested. The emperor couldn't see any benefit in going ahead with this idea, this partnership. So again, Saif this time turned his attention towards Khosrows, the Persians, the other empire in the Arabian Peninsula, sat nestled between the Persian Empire and also the Eastern Roman Empire, and they were the two empires of the day. So Saif went across to Nu'man ibn Mundhir, who was the Khosrows vice-regent over Hira and the neighboring territories in Iraq, and asked him and complained to him about the Abyssinians. Exactly how did he complain to them, to the Byzantine Emperor? Same complaints. We need some support. We need some help. So what he did was he says, look, I can't really say anything, but what I will try to do is organize a council with Khosrows so you can actually discuss with him directly. And so he did. And when he went to see him, he went inside and he talked to the king, and he mentioned to him that, look, we have a sort of foreigners, people who we don't like, people who we don't trust, that are over us in terms of authority, and what we'd like is we would like help from you in order to take back our kingdom. But when we take back our kingdom, we will still be subservient to you. You will be the king of the area, or I will only act as a governor, and obviously this will be your territory. The king asked, obviously, where have these people come from, these foreigners? Because he knew the Byzantine Emperor and the Byzantium Empire were not interested in the Arab world. He knew that. And similarly, he himself at this moment was not interested. So that only left two of the sort of places. One was in Abyssinia and one was in Sindh. So he says, are they from Abyssinia or from Sindh? So he replied, they're from Abyssinia. And he says, I've come for your help, and what we will do is we will establish your kingship over our land. How did Khosrow reply? Did Khosrow accept the request from Saif? Did he send his forces across to Yemen to remove the Abyssinian kingdom there? Or did he also refuse? And if he did refuse, what did Saif do? How did he get on with his work? Well, for all those questions and many more, we're going to have to join me again for our next episode on Sira to Khatam Nabiyyin, because we have unfortunately run out of time. I will hopefully be able to carry on the dialogue between Khosrow and Saif, and how and who, if at all, they sent anybody across to Yemen in order to follow out on Saif's requests and establish a governorship there for the Persian Empire. Or did it stop there? Did Saif have no support whatsoever and it carried on? So I hope you can join me again as we are now getting even closer still to the arrival of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on the scene. We will hopefully be able to see how it is then who was established in Yemen and what carries on in the sort of history of the Kaaba and how it developed over time. I hope you can join me again for the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.